Thank you very much indeed, Melissa Bell, there with the news. And it is time for tonight's debate. And I'm asking tonight, was it revenge for the offensive in Mali, or retaliation for the ousting of Muammar Gaddafi? Or perhaps it was a message to stay out of Libya as the country struggles towards becoming a democracy. There are many theories following today's attack on the French embassy in Tripoli. 2 French guards were injured when a car bomb went off near the diplomatic compound. No one's claimed responsibility for the blast, which comes one day after the French parliament voted to extend its mission in Mali. Well, last week, Al-Qaeda's North African affiliate called on its supporters to target French interests over what it called its neo-imperialist activities. Well, the French Foreign Minister, Laurent Fabius, has jetted over to Tripoli, and here he is speaking a little earlier.
This attack was meant to kill. France will not yield.
So, are we entering a dangerous new phase in Libya? And what can France do to protect its interests there and elsewhere in the region? Well, joining me tonight for our debate is, to my right, Arnaud Castaignet. He's an analyst at the Milestone Group. Good evening to you. I'm also joined by Stephen Ekovich. He's a professor of political science at the American University of Paris. Good to see you again, Professor Ekovich. And Francis Perrin is also here with us tonight. He's the editorial manager of Arab Oil and Gas. Thank you for being with us. Over in Beirut, I'm joined by Anas El Gomati. He's general director of the Sadeq Institute and visiting scholar at the Carnegie Endowment's Middle East Centre. Good evening to you. And we have one more guest, I believe, Waheed Burshan, a political activist. He stood in the last election in Libya. We're having a little trouble getting hold of him, but I'm promised that he will be with us later in the programme. So let's kick off with what we've got right now. Professor Ekovich, let me start with you. No one has claimed responsibility for this attack against the French embassy, but we can't ignore the timing, can we? It comes one day after a vote in the French parliament to prolong that mission in Mali. And earlier this month, we got a warning from Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb that French interests would be targeted.
This has all of the fingerprints of Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, so it's a quite plausible, responsible party in this particular instance. This isn't a new phase. We've been in this phase for quite a number of months, so I think this is probably something that's not surprising. It's tragic. It could have been worse. We've learned that today. So we'll have to wait and see if anybody claims responsibility. If not, I'm sure that the investigative services will probably have a pretty good idea after a certain time who is probably responsible for this.
Anas El Gomati, do you draw a direct link between this bombing and France's activities in Mali?
Yes, well, I think it's probable. I think at this early stage, it's very difficult to ascertain exactly who, precisely with the fact that nobody has come forward, or no group has come forward and claimed responsibility. But I think the timing, I think the way in which this was conducted, the very style of the attack, nothing can be ruled out. And I think it's if it is not a group of that nature, then they're very well aware that they're part of this global conversation and regional conversation and style of attack. So I wouldn't say I would rule that out, but I think it's far too early, especially as the Minister of Interior, Ashur Shouail, has already come out and said they're following various leads. But it's definitely a regional conversation.
All right. Before we go on, let's take a quick listen to the French President, François Hollande. And now, this is a little while ago. It wasn't after this attack, but this is right after a French family were kidnapped in Cameroon. And Hollande was asked if he thought that the kidnapping was linked to the French offensive in Mali, to Operation Salval. And here's what he had to say.
French interests are bound to be threatened by terrorism. This was true before the intervention in Mali and will unfortunately still be true after the intervention. And we must be vigilant, protect our citizens abroad, and that is what we're doing.
Arnaud Castaignet, what do you think of that?
Yeah, the government has a lot of interest to say that yes, this attack has been directly linked to the intervention in Mali, but on the other hand, a lot of other diplomatic missions have been targeted in the past months in Libya, especially. We all remember the attack on the U.S. mission in Benghazi that killed the U.S. ambassador. So, of course, France is now a very important target for Hakim, especially after the intervention in Mali. But that doesn't mean France is the only target. a lot of Western embassies, and also the Tunisian consulate has been attacked in the recent months in Libya. So I think that there's a global environment of insecurity in Libya, and France isn't going to be the only country that is going to be targeted.
Francis Perrin, just yesterday, French lawmakers were discussing this intervention in Mali, voicing their concerns, but also applauding their successes for getting rid of the Islamists in a large part of the country. Do you think there's a link?
I would to be very cautious at this stage. Of course, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb is a usual suspect, and for good reasons, if I may so. But we can also think to a pro-Gaddafi group, because we have to remember that in 2011, France played a major role in the fall of Gaddafi's regime. And of course, some people did not forget this. As you know, the political situation in Libya today is very complex, with very important and role of militias and various militias. It's very difficult in all this web of militias, of armed groups, etc. Some of them are not, of course, very oriented towards Western countries, including France. So there are at least 3 or 4 plausible assumptions for a bombing such as the one which hit the French embassy yesterday.
Now, in the wake of that attack on the US compound in Benghazi, the United States was criticised for, by its own Congress, in fact, for underestimating the security risk. Do you think that's what's happened with the French as well, Analyst Gomati?
I think Libya today remains the most densely armed territory on earth, and I think that in itself as a fact should mean that all diplomatic missions, all corporate interests, even all social interests shouldn't be taken with a pinch of salt. As your other guest mentioned earlier on, the attacks that have taken place in the last 9 months to 12 months in Benghazi have literally driven the international community out of that city. I think the Maltese diplomatic mission is the only, only mission of the international community which remains there. And for that very fact, tells you that, just driving the conversation towards Tripoli doesn't mean that it's an isolated incident. It's nothing but more of a wider conversation, one that has been going on for quite a while. And I think in that sense, underestimating what happened with the US embassy, it's negligent and it's complacent at best.
On the part of the Americans or the Libyans?
Well, I think it's, again, what's happening with the Arab Spring, what's happening with the Libyan uprising, what's happening with this Libyan democratic transition means that it's part of a global conversation. The very moment the international community, voted at the UN, decided that as a European approach and with Western and American assistance would intervene into Libya, it doesn't mean that you put your left foot in and then you leave your right foot outside. There has to be a mutual approach towards this. Though I would say that, with caution, Libya has a history of 102 years of fascism, Mussolini's brand and then Gaddafi's brand, with a 12-year gap of the king in between. So that kind of leaves a distinct hangover of an approach and a sensitivity and a certain sense of cynicism when it comes to working with international partners. So I would say that it's an opportunity, in fact, to look at new ways of diplomacy. Chris Stevens, his history, his actual appointment was something of a very new brand for the American diplomatic kind of arena. And that that kind of very sense of having a native Arab speaker, somebody that was outside living with the people, was something very, very new. His actual replacement, Lawrence Pope, who came in afterwards, was a distinctly different breed, has a history in counter-terrorism, and shows that the American mission then has taken that into consideration. So, I think French missions will probably do the same. So
when you heard Libyan officials today, one of the ministers said that France was a brother nation, and he condemned the attack. Is he not speaking on behalf of a lot of Libyans who, in fact, welcomed the French intervention in Libya, who welcomed French help in getting rid of Gaddafi?
I think the overwhelming majority of the population. I couldn't think of a single person that I've seen today, that I've spoken to in the last year, that hasn't been able to gratefully and praise the French assistance to Libya. There are even jokes of people naming their sons Sarkozy after the intervention. So I think there's no harm, or I'm under no doubt that the Libyan populace at large, is outraged at this, and have already said that this was not only an attack on the French diplomatic mission, but an attack on the Libyan people themselves, because there was a young Libyan girl of 18 years old that has already sustained spinal injuries and has gone to Tunisia to go and get medical attention. So it's something that the Libyans feel they're outraged about. It's an attack on them themselves. After what happened in Benghazi on September 11th of last year, 35,000 people came to the streets to retake those streets and to say that we're outraged by this and that we no longer want any of these actions to be done in our name. Violence is not a demographic figure, I would say, especially not terrorism. So I would say in that sense, Libyans are outraged, by all means and by all stretches of the imagination by this, by this act.
Stephen Ekovich, just going back to the security situation in Tripoli, when you look at where the French embassy was, it's right in the middle of town. It's in a residential area. As our guest just mentioned, some Libyan residents were also injured. Did the French underestimate how dangerous a place this is?
First of all, embassies are usually in upscale areas of any city. Secondly, whenever there's an incident like this, of course, the security and the intelligence services are criticized, but they can't be 100%. They can't perform 100%, even if they're 99% effective. And they've probably stopped by anticipation and by proactive measures other attempts against the interests of France and the United States and Italy, etc. Of course, whenever this happens, there's going to be criticism, but we can easily lose sight of, and we don't know, but we can easily lose sight of the successes that the French security agencies or the American security agencies and others have had in the past. So it's never 100% sure. It's maybe 99% effective, but that 1% success rate on the other side, of course, will naturally lead to criticism.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the majority of Libyans were supporting the French and British intervention to Libya, and most of them don't hate France. But you only need 1% of terrorists to take advantage of the weakness of the current Libyan authorities and to operate. So I don't think anyone underestimated the danger of being in Libya, but
is there a risk now that the kind of diplomacy that was employed by Ambassador Stevens, for example, getting close ties with the Libyan people, really finding out what's going on in communities, building links with communities, that is now at risk because the embassies themselves are at risk and diplomats are at risk?
Maybe France is going to send more and more security guards, but I think Libya now needs to. I think the Western countries and all of the allies of Libya need now to give their support to the authorities, to the associations on the field, on the ground, and to the citizens working there. So I don't believe we're going to change this policy. I think we might increase that kind of policy rather than stopping it and just being locked in a bunker.
Okay, let's talk a bit about who could possibly be behind this attack. Of course, nobody was arrested in the wake of, no one has yet been arrested following the attack in Benghazi last year, and no one has claimed responsibility for this attack. Some analysts say this could be the very same militants who were chased out of Libya by the NATO airstrikes, made it down to Mali and been chased back out of Mali by the French offensive. Do you think there's any truth to that?
You cannot exclude this assumption. We are not sure, of course. We cannot be sure, but it's a possibility among some other possibilities. What is clear is that these guys are very mobile, of course. They know that they are not here to stay at the same place, waiting to be arrested by Libyan forces or being detected by foreign intelligence services. So their mobility is one of their key assets. At the same thing, we have a very complex political situation in Libya now. So it's not only some jihadist groups coming from another country and entering Libya and going out and going in, etc. Within Libya's borders themselves, you have a very web of militias. You have pro-Gaddafi. They are not all, of course, out of Libya.
So we can't rule out the fact that this might have been an attack by people who are still disgruntled by the fact that Gaddafi was ousted from power.
It's a real possibility as far as France is concerned, or some other countries. We cannot say that it's the probability is more important than some other we discussed here, including Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, but it's a real probability for such a case, yes.
Well, it's of course it's a possibility. It would be a bit surprising because so far supporters of Gaddafi haven't shown their ability to get all of the weapons and to do attacks similar like this one. Most of the time they have been organizing riots such as in Bani Walid, but for the moment they still haven't launched any attack like this against a foreign embassy. But of course it's a possibility. You have a lot of suspected groups. You have supporters of Gaddafi, former supporters of Gaddafi. You have Hakim. You have militias. You have federalist militias also that can be very, very violent. But for the moment, I think most of the analysts believe that Hakim is the most important suspect.
There's a lot of suspects in the lineup right now. Anas El Gomati. What do you think about this line that it could be militants who were chased out of Libya and have now returned?
Well, effectively during the revolution, you had 25 to 50,000 people that were manning the border control that effectively just went home. I mean, that's really just what happened. You know, they're no longer in jobs, and that's an incredibly porous area to try and guard. And so it's anybody's guess who's come in, but there's, to a certain extent, you know, an elephant in the room when discussing the Arab Spring, which is not that a transition is undergoing or that a regime fell or that a single man fell, but in fact the machinery of the state was fallen as well. And the most important component of the state since Abdel Nasser kind of imported the system in from the Russians has been the intelligence services. And as you know, many dictators flew off to their summer havens in Saudi Arabia or elsewhere, or just went to Sharm el-Sheikh, you know, the intelligence services just crumbled, and that in itself has been 2 years of people being able to move freely. Now that's it's almost an irony or a paradox to a certain extent, which is that by dismantling fascist regimes, as have been found in North Africa, the attempted response by various stakeholders undermines the ability of the state to kind of stand on its own 2 feet. And so in that respect, trying to build a credible intelligence service which respects human rights, which isn't going to put people away in prison and torture them, but is also going to do some useful kind of intelligence gathering and try and aid in counterinsurgency, is one of the most difficult spectres for, and it's probably one of the biggest challenges for most of the post-Arab Spring nations coming into transition. So that's, I would say, is the kind of biggest challenge. It means that, in fact, this very discussion by nature is going to say, well, nobody really knows who it is. Even the intelligence services of Libya, of Tunisia, of Egypt, of Mali, of Niger don't know who it is.
Anas, we'll have to hold it there. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back with the second part of tonight's debate in just a moment. Stay with us.